everything points to a terrorist attack, if there's no evidence for a video-inspired protest, then where'd the false narrative start? Started with you, Madam Secretary. 1 hour before the attack in Benghazi, Chris Stevens walks the diplomat to the front gate. The ambassador didn't report a demonstration. An eyewitness in the command center that night on the ground said no protest, no demonstration. 2 intelligence reports that day. No protest, no demonstration. The attack starts at 3:42 Eastern Time, ends at approximately 11:40. At 4:06, an ops alert goes out across the State Department. It says this: mission under attack, armed men, shots fired, explosions heard. No mention of a video, no mention of a protest, no mention of a demonstration. At 10:08, with no evidence, before the attack is over, when Tyrone Woods and Glenn Doherty are still on the roof of the annex fighting for their lives, the official statement of the State Department blames a video. Why?
In fact, during the course of that week, we had many attacks that were all about the video. We had people breaching the walls of our embassies in Tunis and Khartoum. We had people, thankfully not Americans, dying at protests, but that's what was going on, Congressman.
Secretary Clinton, I appreciate most of those attacks were after the attack in Benghazi. You mentioned Cairo. It's interesting what else Ms. Newland said that day. She said, if pressed by the press, if there's a connection between Cairo and Benghazi, she said this: there's no connection between the two. So here's what troubles me. Your experts knew the truth. Your spokesperson knew the truth. Greg Hicks knew the truth. But what troubles me more is I think you knew the truth. I want to show you a few things here. You're looking at an email you sent to your family. At 11 o'clock that night, approximately 1 hour after you told the American people it was a video, you say to your family, 2 officers were killed today in Benghazi by an Al-Qaeda-like group. You tell the American people one thing, you tell your family an entirely different story. And finally, most significantly, the next day, within 24 hours, you had a conversation with the Egyptian Prime Minister. You told him this: we know the attack in Libya had nothing to do with the film. It was a planned attack, not a protest. Why didn't you tell the American people exactly what you told the Egyptian Prime Minister?
Well, I think if you look at the statement that I made, I clearly said that it was an attack. But
real quick, calling it an attack is like saying the sky's blue. Of course it was an attack.
Well,
we want to know the truth. The statement you sent out was a statement on Benghazi, and you say vicious behavior as a response to inflammatory material on the internet. If that's not pointing as the motive of being a video, I don't know what is. And that's certainly how the American people saw it. Here's what I think's going on. Let me show you one more slide. Again, this is from Victoria Nuland, your press person. Subject line reads this: Romney's statement on Libya. Talking points memo. This email's at 10:35, 27 minutes after your 10:08 statement. 27 minutes after you've told everyone it's a video. While Americans are still fighting because the attack's still going on, your top people are talking politics. Seems to me that night you had 3 options, Secretary. You could tell the truth, tell them it was a terrorist attack. You could say, you know what, we're not quite sure. But you picked a 3rd option. You picked the video narrative. You picked the one with no evidence, and you did it because Libya was supposed to be a success story for the Obama White House and the Clinton State Department. And a key campaign theme that year was GM's alive, bin Laden's dead, Al-Qaeda's on the run. And now you have a terrorist attack. And it's a terrorist attack in Libya. And it's just 56 days before an election.
There's an early 2014 email from Hillary Clinton, so not so long after she left Secretary of State, to her campaign manager, John Podesta. That email, it states that ISIS, is funded by Saudi Arabia and Qatar, the governments of Saudi Arabia and Qatar. Now, this is I think this is the most significant email in the whole collection. And perhaps because Saudi and Qatari money is spread all over the place, including into many media institutions.
It was called The Innocence of Muslims, a film that portrayed the Prophet Muhammad as a philanderer and a thug. A 14-minute movie trailer launched protests across the Muslim world.
Susan Rice goes on 5 TV shows, and she says this: Benghazi was a spontaneous reaction as a consequence of a video. A statement we all know is false.
Over the last several days, this is a response to a hateful and offensive video that was widely disseminated throughout the Arab and Muslim world. Obviously, our view is that there is absolutely no excuse for violence and that what has happened is condemnable. But this is a spontaneous reaction to a video, and it's not dissimilar, but perhaps on a slightly larger scale than what we have seen in the past with the satanic verses with the cartoon of the Prophet Muhammad.
Well, that memo was written in 2011 when Gaddafi had fallen, and it looked like they were holding this up as sort of an alternative to the George W. Bush invasion of Iraq, a coalition of nations that had intervened. They saw this as what she referred to as smart power, and they really thought this might be something they would hold up as a very successful part of her record as she ran for president. But there is no good example of intervention or non-intervention in these countries since the Arab Spring and before that. I mean, you have Iraq, where we spent years occupying, very tragic outcome. You have Libya, where we intervened but did not occupy and pretty much, stayed out of it afterwards. Not a good outcome. And you have Syria, where we have really not intervened, have not occupied, and you've had this, terrible civil war with huge casualties. So, some people in Washington are questioning whether there is any right answer in these extremely complicated countries in the Middle East.
He went to Egypt and gave a speech. Now, where are we 3.5 years later? The entire North Africa has experienced this Arab Spring. Tunisia, Libya,
You've got to be
Egypt.
kidding me.
Sean, you were totally opposed to the Arab Spring in Egypt.
We're almost out of time.
We should
Let me
support
say this.
Mubarak
Hang on,
and have another
Steve.
Tiananmen Square.
Now let me ask you this. When he says that we're arrogant, when he says that we're guilty of torture, when he says that we're forcing our values down other, that we've been dismissive, when he uses all these terms, isn't he apologizing for American exceptionalism and leadership?
Steve, you're talking about the Arab Spring, where he replaced pro-Western dictators with anti-Western dictators, and we've got total chaos over there. And he's so afraid of he's so afraid of upsetting Muslims that he allowed this thing to happen in Benghazi. It's shameful.
Yes, just say it.
All right,
just
we
say
gotta
it.
go.
You think Mubarak should still be in charge, right?
You know something?
Why don't you both just
something,
say
Steve?
that?
It's
We should have had a
embarrassing.
Tiananmen
This
Square in
president
Cairo.
embarrassed this country with these apologies.
Well, given the spread of ISIS in Libya, you report that some of Obama's top national security aides are now pushing for a second American military intervention in Libya.
Yeah, I mean, one of the ironies here is that, you've almost come full circle.
Several years ago, Samuel Huntington famously wrote a book called The Clash of Civilizations. He was roundly criticized, sometimes for exaggerating things. Now some people go back to this and saying, well,
I don't, I have problems with the Huntington thesis because it seems to me to oversimplify. It suggests that there is a thing called Islam and a thing called the West, and that they are in conflict with each other. And we can see that most commonplace look at the Muslim world shows that the great battles happening now is happening inside the Muslim world. It's a Sunni Shia problem. Many, many more Muslims are being killed by other Muslims than are being killed by any Western drones. But the thesis itself it's oversimplifying to the point where it obscures the truth. The truth is that there's an enormous battle happening inside the Muslim world. I think also in the Muslim world, it's very important that Muslims name it properly, that they see that this is, and I think increasingly intellectuals around the Muslim world are beginning to do that.
you're confident that there will be more.
I'm not confident of anything. I'm just saying there are signs of it. But I think you have, if you have a cancer in your system, you can't get rid of it until you first acknowledge that it's inside your body. And this is a kind of cancer in Islam. And it needs to be acknowledged as being inside Islam and not separate from it.
Right. You are a staunch defender of free speech or in kind of US style, but also a secular French style, I would say. And obviously there are controversies all the time, both in the US and also in the UK and in France. That's why many people are saying, well, we're all today Salman Rushdie's in a way. Obviously, not having gone through what you're living, but in terms of the threats, in one of your interviews, you compared this to the Hitchcock movie, The Birds. There's one bird landing, no one cares, and then they all arrive.
And it's true that I felt about what happened to the Satanic Verses as being like one of the first episodes in what afterwards became a much larger narrative. You know, when it was the first bird and later the sky was full of birds. So yeah, I think that. But this book is a kind of, yes, it's about what's happening in the world because I feel with all my books that I want to look at what's happening in the world. And the reason the book is not a naturalistic portrait of what's happening in the Middle East is that I wanted to try and reach for something a little more universalist than just to write an allegory of the muse. I wanted to say that this quarrel, the quarrel between the rational and the irrational, it's not new. You know, it's been happening for as long as we've been around. And also, it's not only an external battle, it's also an internal battle.
But it's an internal battle in Islam, clearly.
Yeah, but it's an internal battle in human beings. You know, I mean, I think we all have an irrational side to us.
Controversy that we see around Islam, about naming Islamist terrorism or not, that you're having in the US, in the UK, in France. Do you think people are more afraid to name names because of what could happen to them?
No, I think they're more afraid to name it for fear of there being repercussions against innocent people. You know, so the desire not to make all Muslims guilty of Islamic terrorism means that people don't like to say Islamic terrorism, but unfortunately it is Islamic terrorism. And that's to say, if everybody who carries out these acts say that they do it in the name of Islam, it's really quite unreasonable to say that that's not Muslim. You know, it's obviously a kind of Islam that many Muslims would reject.
Is it only unreasonable or is it on purpose?
Well, it's on purpose and unreasonable. You know, that's to say, when President Obama is reluctant to use the phrase Islamic terrorism, I think he's playing into the hands of the right wing.